Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Archives 2024 Annual Digital Lecture. My name is Irini Gudaruli, and my pronouns are she, hers. I'm the head of research here at the National Archives, and I will be chairing this year's annual digital lecture. Before we get going, I would like to go over some brief housekeeping notes and provide some accessibility information. Today's lecture is live and will last around 30 minutes. After this, we will take a 5-minute comfort break before we have our live Q&A. We appreciate all of your questions, so please feel free to start asking them in a Q&A box throughout the lecture. The lecture is captioned, and live captioning will be available for the Q&A. Unless you're watching on a mobile device, you can enable this by clicking Meeting Automated Captions at the bottom of your screen. The event has been recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube as soon as possible. If you would like to follow or take part in the conversation on X, you can use our handle, or you can search for UK National Archives and use the hashtag for today's event, #AnnualDigiLecture. Both will be shared with you in the chat, both the handle and the hashtag for today. Following today's event, we will be sending out an online feedback survey. Your feedback is invaluable to us when planning events such as this, so please do fill that in if you have 5 or 10 minutes to spare. You may not know this, but the National Archives is an independent research organization recognized by UK Research and Innovation. We are a research active organization with the capacity to carry out research projects that substantially extend the national research base across the cultural heritage and information sectors through innovative and exciting research programs. Our research is inherently interdisciplinary, drawing on the skills and expertise of archivists, conservators, historians, computer scientists, digital humanities, and many others. While our research contributes to multiple fields of knowledge, it speaks primarily to the opportunities and challenges we face as archive. We will soon publish a new research vision. The vision is our plan of action for the next 3 years from 2024 to 2027. It champions the research of our colleagues and our collaborators, captures what we have already been able to achieve together, invites new connections, possibilities, and innovations, and sets the foundations to ensure that the research we continue to build is as inclusive, accessible, engaging, and innovative as possible. Digital research is a hugely important part of our archival work, and we are particularly interested in how we can use emerging technologies in an ethical, safe, and transparent way to solve our biggest archival practice challenges. We are also continuing to evolve our understanding of the ever-changing technological, information legislation, and data protection landscapes that support our role as custodian of the record of the state. As part of this year's lecture and showcasing some of the exciting digital research happening at the National Archives, we currently have a collection of research posters on display on site at Kew. This display foregrounds the exciting, innovative, and vast digital research happening at the National Archives. Some of the topics and projects explored include the National Farm Survey Project, our Heritage and our Stories, the UK Government Web Archive, the Material Culture of Wales, research software prototyping, the annotation of digital objects, and the copyright world of early photography. As a key event in our calendar, the annual digital lecture offers the opportunity to hear from leading speakers on a topic related to digital research and practice. This year, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Eleanor Drage and Dr. Kerry McInerney, who will be speaking to us today about how feminism and anti-racist ideas contribute to the discussion about AI regulation and governance, why this matters for archival researchers, and how archival research is playing a key role in AI ethics in their lecture titled Turning Over a New Leaf, AI Ethics in Through the Archives. Both Dr. Drage and Dr. McInerney are senior research fellows at the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge, and together they co-host the award-winning The Good Robot podcast, where they interview top scholars and technologists about AI ethics. Dr. McInerney co-leads the Global Politics of AI project on how AI is impacting international relationships. She is also a research fellow at the AI Now Institute, a leading AI policy think tank in New York, and was a visiting fellow at the Institute of Advanced Studies, UCL, for 2023 to 2024. Dr. Drage is a co-director of AI Narratives of Justice program, a co-I of the Desirable Digitalization Project, and PI on the HEAT project, an AI ethics and regulation project that helps companies respond to the EU AI Act. So without further ado, Dr. Eleanor Drage and Kerry McInerney, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having us. So Eleanor and I will be doing kind of two 15-minute mini presentations, and I believe Eleanor will be kicking us off.
Thank you so much for having me here today. Mine will be slightly less archive related, so bear with me. What I'll be talking about today is a project that I've been working on for quite some time. We were asking ourselves in our office, can we make regulation feminist? And I know we're all really worried about AI, but lots of companies were coming forward and telling us, we'd love to actually collaborate and do regulation in the best way that we can. How can we go further than just ticking boxes? How can we really breathe some life into these very stodgy bits of regulation that have been watered down and through campaigning by big tech companies in Brussels? And I was really encouraged by the optimism and the utopianism of this request in some ways. It feels as though we're sort of battling against these powers that we can't, that we really can't even match up against because we're so small and insignificant in comparison. But I really believe in what Laura Donaldson calls political tartar control. So the daily act of brushing your teeth is a kind of this sort of daily meditation on how we can work towards a better world individually. Sort of like recycling, you know, does it make a difference in the context of what's going out in massive industrial plants? Who knows, but it's an important part of working towards a better world. So I will just share my slides. Okay, so can there be feminist regulation? And Kerry and I will talk about this kind of wide range of work that we do today in various forms. I was approached by an AI company from Italy, from Emilia-Romagna, the region, called Amagamma last year. And together we've created a toolkit called HEAT. It's for high-risk AI tools. Now, the EU AI Act divides AI into different risk categories and only has these obligations for high-risk tools, which is, of course, a massive problem. However, this is a kind of best practice framework for all AI tools. And what we're trying to do is infuse it with radical ideas. From Data Feminism, a great book by Catherine D'Ignazio and Lauren Klein, like Design Justice by Sasha Costanza-Chock, and of course the great work of Sarah Ahmed, who writes about complaints in big institutions. And if any of you have complained within an institution and have found yourself hitting your head against a wall, this is the book for you. And we're really interested in how, when you complain about an AI system and that complaint goes nowhere, how that actually could be incorporated into regulation so that there is some kind of redress and complaint mechanism. We believe that AI ethics is something that is distributed. So there's actually no such thing as an AI ethicist, I would say. And this is something that one of our colleagues, Maya Ganesh, has said a lot. I love this idea that there's no such thing as an AI ethicist, even though it slightly puts Kerry and I out of business. I really believe that ethics is something that happens through conversations with different actors that have different specialisms. So these are the people that contributed to our tool, that gave us feedback, that went through all the content, and they are central to the thing itself. So here's also an idea, if you're interested in AI ethics, whose work you can go to and who's out there. So second from the top, Kevin Guyon has got a great book out on queer data that I highly recommend. Far right, Cynthia Bennett works on disability justice and writes about making technologies more accessible. Of course, down at the bottom, there's Catherine D'Ignazio, who's written that book, Data Feminism, that I talked about, and Oz Keys in the middle, who writes fantastic work on autism and AI, and has written an amazing paper with Kerry on emotion recognition technology that doesn't work, that is just pseudoscience and snake oil. So do check it out. So yeah, there's no such thing as an AI ethics expert. What we try to do in our centre, Kerry and I, is we work with lots of different kinds of organisations. So, you know, part of the reason we give talks to institutions like the National Archives is because people who don't think that they have a role in AI ethics actually do. Whether that's people who are out on the streets protesting for different issues, and particularly spaces like, you know, the BLM protests that we were seeing a few years ago. Now we know that there was AI used to track those protests and to shut them down, and I'll talk about those in a minute. AI literacy is really important. We know a lot about literacy. AI literacy is something similar. So being able to know enough about AI, whether that's the effects of AI rather than the thing itself. You know, I don't need a definition of machine learning from everybody in the UK, but sort of having an indication of where it's used and what the effects are, I think, is definitely a start. Of course, medics and, you know, anywhere that the AI is rolled out, in, you know, biometrics or whatever, access now and these amazing civil society organizations. And then I'm really also invested in tech unions. They are, I think, you know, being part of a union is always a mixed bag. I'm not sure what kind of unions archivists would be part of, but it's a great way of transferring information about technology and where AI is beginning to be used in your industry. And of course, the good life. I think, you know, we all have a moral obligation to actually sit for a minute and think, what is the world that I want to inhabit with technology? What do I want it to look like? What would be a useful technology in relation to my work, and what actually isn't? And I just wanted to begin by showing you a couple of pictures. This is an excuse to I think, you know, my segue into this is about decentering expertise, decentering intelligence. Decentering the idea of the AI ethicist. Here's some iconography that Karen and I constantly trying to battle with. And in our book, The Good Robot, that came out this year, we have really stunning visuals. And part of why we wanted to do that was because these are the kinds of images that we're constantly looking at. And I'm sure you see a lot of these historical images that are processed into these very bland forms. So we've got Michelangelo's Hand of God on the left. We've got, and I usually, if it was in person, I'd test you and see which ones you know, but I'm not there with you. In the middle there, you have Rodin and Le Penseur. the thinker, this very big muscular man whose masculinity is very much part of his ability to think. And on the right, you have the Vitruvian man, which is hanging over the desk at Google DeepMind in the King's Cross offices. So these are images that are incredibly popular today and really emblematic of intelligence and perfection. So on the left, I really quite like this this M&M pretzel ad, even though it does carry these sort of toxic ideas of intelligence and perfection and masculinity, and shows that they do loom large. Right, so these are the kinds of ideas that we were trying to also contest in our toolkit. If you'd like to experiment, not now, later, please do take a screenshot of the QR codes, and then you're very welcome to follow the instructions and have a play around after to see what we've been doing, and I will show you now. So regulation, quite dry, not what I imagine myself to be doing, quite linear. My mind doesn't really work in a linear way. But what we were trying to do is sort of turn the linearity on its head and say, okay, fine, you need to go from overview to business team principles. You know, when you're creating an AI tool, you need to start off thinking about who's in your team, then risk mitigation, then the stakeholders you're engaging with, and then user-centered design. But we make sure that people are constantly coming back to these different parts of developing an AI tool, because actually developing anything is not linear, and you must come back and think again about risk mitigation once you know more about where your AI tool is going to be deployed. Some parts of the EU AI Act that were compulsory, well, all of the compulsory elements, we get people to think about seriously and document the responses. So here are some of the compulsory elements. It's compulsory to document the purpose of the AI tool. And then how do we make that feminist? Well, if it's compulsory to document the purpose of the tool, this is kind of an excuse for us to say, well, do you actually have a good purpose? Is your reason for AI the right reason? Is it the right tool for the job? And we were interviewing quite a few years ago for the podcast Priya Goswami, who was the founder of an AI tool called Mumpkin. And this was a tool designed to help people start difficult conversations around female genital cutting. And she said, we need an exit door, both as creators of AI and as consumers of AI. And what she meant by that is we need to give people the opportunity to say, I don't think we should be building AI for this particular for this particular project, or give consumers the opportunity to say, I don't want to be using AI right now. So we've embedded these this idea into the way that we've structured the toolkit. We have this exercise at the bottom. Is AI the best solution to your problem? When approaching AI, it's crucial to first acknowledge that the optimal solution may not actually be AI at all. And then we give lots of examples. One example of when AI evidently was not the right tool for the job was a project that then Kerry and I went on to work on, and it was about video recruitment technologies that aim to recognize your personality from looking at your face. Now, I don't know about you, but my personality is quite complicated, and I don't think that it can be assessed even by myself or my family, let alone by AI. These tools don't work. And I created this tool with, which was a replication of these tools, these AI hiring tools, with some second-year computer science students. And what you can see here is that if you change the lighting, brightness, and saturation of the image, that also changes your score for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And what you can't see on this screen, even though you can see the original score that you were given, that I was given, and then the score that I was given after I made those changes to the image. Further right to that, there is an invite to interview score. So how you score on this bit of software affects whether you're invited to an interview at a company or not. Now, the real problem with this wasn't that it didn't work, strangely enough, but it was actually that these tools are being used to diversify the workforce. So there's this idea that personality is race and gender free. And so these tools can bypass these sticky issues that recruitment staff are trying to avoid in some cases by just focusing on personality. But my students knew well enough, that race and gender are part of your, they're part of your life, they're part of your personality. They are, things that cannot be avoided. They're part of your everyday lived experience. And they don't want recruiters that are trying to avoid looking at bits of them, sort of that kind of colorblind, gender blind approach. They want to be loved and looked at generously by the people that are hiring them. And this is what we published this study, and it gained a lot of traction in the BBC. And so do check it out if you're interested. And then another tool that shouldn't have been AI is an accent recognition technology. Accent recognition is the name given to it, but it doesn't recognize anything actually. So it's not really recognition at all. What it does is, this is used by the German Office for Federal Migration, and they use it on asylum seekers to see whether they're telling the truth about the stated place of origin. So if they say they're from somewhere, does the tool validate that or not? And we are working with this fantastic sound engineer. Well, we were interviewing him and talking to him about this tool, and Pedro Oliveras from Berlin, and he's created these amazing pieces of research on how there is no point of origin in the voice. When you're already a suspicious institution looking to reject asylum seekers, you're trying to peel off the layers of the onion, but actually underneath there is no point of origin, because where is authenticity in the voice? Is it in the tone of the voice? Is it in the frequency? No, it doesn't exist anywhere. Unfortunately, not all good things are compulsory in the EU AI Act. And one of the things that isn't is diversity in teams. Now, there's quite a few different reasons for that. But we wanted to give diversity another look because it's important and it's widely misunderstood. And in other EU laws, it is compulsory. So I think really that is at the heart of what the EU is trying to do. Kerry and I spent a couple of years interviewing AI engineers and big tech. And one of the things that we were told a lot is that diversity is an HR issue. So this person said that it doesn't really touch the technologies that we're developing. Diversity relates more to the people that work for us and what we've got in place to help them progress. So it was thought to be an HR issue. So we said, okay, well, how can we make diversity actually meaningful within technology? How can we relate it to tech itself? And in this tool, we explain, and we have this rationale section because everybody needs to know why they're being asked to do something. We say the lack of diversity in tech teams is leading to ill-fitting solutions, unanticipated harms, and misrepresentation of users and their needs. And then we give examples. So, unfortunately, Internet of Things devices are used for coercive control. And at the company that Kerry and I were doing interviews at, they had become aware recently that the tools that they were developing were used for these ends, and they were developing functionalities that were able to minimize this risk. And of course, this was pointed out by someone who had experienced this themselves. So, if there's people on the team who are more likely to have experienced these negative impacts of technology, to experience these harms, then that's going to be a really brilliant thing for those organizations and those teams. So if you're more likely to have experienced this kind of thing, then that's part of what it means. Diversity is not tokenism, and we have a lot of tokenistic, either tokenistic hiring or people feeling like diversity is just tokenism, and we explain why no one wants to feel like a diversity hire. and what it means to actually have a diverse team. It's not, as we were told, having someone, we were told by some engineers that their team was diverse because there was someone from the Netherlands and someone from Portugal, and this is obviously not diversity, but it shows that there's a real misunderstanding of what diversity is within an organization. And the last thing I'm going to say is that non-discrimination, equality, and justice is compulsory in the EU. But what does this mean? How can actually we bring this to life in the way people are developing technology? Well, there are a few things that are preventing us at the moment from doing this well. And one is it's sort of wishy-washy terminology around bias. Bias is something that you probably all heard of, but what does it really mean? I became very aware that it wasn't doing any real critical work when speaking at this panel at Bloomberg a while ago for International Women's Day, which is when Kerry and I get wheeled in to talk about something in a tech company and then sort of wheeled out unceremoniously by the evening. And this panel was titled Balancing AI Bias, which sounds very friendly and lovely. And I think it's nice for ethics to sound friendly. However, what are you balancing bias against? Are you balancing it against profits, against against kind of the things that you actually want in an organization, like innovation? What's going on? It's meaningless. And we know this because, and I actually have another slide that I didn't have add here. We had AI engineers tell us that bias is the intercept between the X and Y axis, that bias has many mathematical meanings and therefore is pretty much meaningless to them. So bias means something very, very different in the media. When you and I open a newspaper and it says, oh, X and Y technology is biased, as it does in mathematics. So the people who are actually creating these tools have a very different sense of what it means. So we suggest in this tool, let's put the idea of bias to one side and think instead about power. And for a long time now, Kerry and I have been pitching these papers that are really amazing. One of them is just a comment piece by Priya Kalluri called "Don't ask if AI is good or fair, ask how it shifts power." And I really urge you to go and read this. It's very short and it's really interesting, a really nice way of rethinking what it means for AI to be good. Personally, I think that AI cannot be good unless it's socially beneficial to marginalized communities. And that's really it. Everyone has to draw the line somewhere. And I think what we're trying to urge organizations to do is to have these very difficult, very contentious conversations. Because if ethics isn't happening at this heightened pitch, then to me, it's not ethics. It's not supposed to be super friendly, pleasing everybody, because we know that Google's ethics principles do very little. This is another fantastic piece on algorithmic reparations, reparations as in colonial reparations, a conversation that I argue about with my family on a daily basis. This is something that really should be discussed within organizations. It should be this contentious. And this is a really fantastic, interesting piece, whatever your thoughts on the issue. And thought I'd end with a sort of, cheeky plug for the podcast and this book, which has on the right, this is Kerry and I interviewing leading thinkers, technologists, and activists and artists. And so it's not really necessarily our voice so much as this incredible community of people that think very differently about what good technology is. And it's our baby and it's a really beautiful book. So yeah, do check it out. And I will pass on to Kerry.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just now also going to share my screen, which is always the worst part of any presentation. So could you let me know if you can see my screen now? Okay, I'm not seeing or hearing any complaints. Great. So yeah, thank you so much, Eleanor, for that really fascinating exploration of how we're thinking about these questions in AI ethics. And yes, thinking about why feminist and anti-racist ideas and methodologies are really important for shaking up AI regulation and governance. And I really, want to foreground what Eleanor was saying about destabilizing the politics of expertise, because I think something we see a lot in AI governance and regulation, big tech actors pushing to have themselves established as the experts on all sorts of domains and areas of life based on their tech excellence. And we really want to push back on that and say, actually all sorts of different pockets and aspects of our societies, all the different kinds of lived knowledge and expertise we've built up are really, really crucial when it comes to grappling with the social and the political problems posed by new technologies like AI. And so for this part of our presentation, I actually wanted to think about historical methods and analysis. And so that's why this part's called AI Ethics Through the Archives, to say, what actually do the archives themselves and archival research offer to us when it comes to thinking about AI ethics and regulation. I do want to add a very important caveat that I am not a formally trained historian. I did do a lot of archival research for my PhD and for some of my current projects, so I'm very familiar with the National Archives. I have had many a panini in that little cafe on the bottom floor. But, with the caveat that there are a wide range of really, really phenomenal historians of technology whose work I would absolutely recommend if this is something you'd like to discuss further. But in this whistle-stop kind of quick overview, I want to talk about 3 ways I see historical research and methods being crucial to AI ethics. And the first is that historical work helps us construct critical genealogies of AI. The second is that it can help us find better analogies for AI and for this current political and social moment of tech production. And the third is that I believe historical research and methods can help us generate better ethical approaches to AI. And so I'll give a few examples of that at the end of the talk. But first, I want to talk about constructing critical genealogies of AI. So a lot of the hype around AI tends to treat AI as though it is a complete novelty. It's something unprecedented and unseen in human history. And a lot of national AI strategies often replicate this idea. They say, this is a radical break from the past. This contributes, I think, to the placelessness of AI and AI ethics, this idea that AI is this immensely scalable, universalizable technology, rather than one that is, deeply rooted in particular historical and political contexts. And so what brilliant scholars, people like Ruha Benjamin, among many others, have been doing is placing AI within a much longer social and historical continuum. And this particularly matters when it comes to issues of inequality and discrimination and injustice in AI. And so Benjamin, for example, in Race After Technology, talks about how AI does not represent this radical break from the past, but rather replicates long-standing forms of racial inequality and injustice, but does so under this veneer of objectivity that she calls the New Jim Code, itself a play on the idea of the New Jim Crow. Michelle Alexander's work on the way that mass incarceration in the US functions as a new kind of de facto racial segregation. And so what does this look like in the field of AI ethics? This often looks like mapping histories of repression. And so a lot of the debates we have around AI and human rights today look at things like, for example, the way that new AI-powered technologies might be used to surveil us and to watch us in non-consensual ways, so thus infringing upon our right to privacy. But really important work by scholars like Simone Brown, for example, have emphasized the much longer racial history of surveillance, and scholarship from post-colonial studies, decolonial studies, has also located how the expansion of the collection of biometric data played a really key role in regimes of colonization, and specifically this desire by the colonizer to map and understand and quantify the bodies of the colonized. So to give an example of this, actually on the left is a document from the National Archives. I was there a couple of weeks ago, looking at the development of fingerprinting technologies and methods across the early 20th century. And this is part of a wider project, which is thinking about the way that colonized India was used as this kind of imperial laboratory for the development of new biometric techniques of measurement that were ultimately used in the service of criminalization. At the same time, though, historical research can be really important for mapping histories of resistance to technology. And I think that's one of the most encouraging things that comes out of these stories, is that even as there is mass repression, there is almost always resistance. So, for example, the British Luddite movement has had a kind of rebranding over the past few years by scholars like Brian Merchant, who argue that the Luddites were not anti-technology, as they often portrayed, but rather anti the effects that technology were having on their societies, They were against the inequitable distribution of the benefits of technology. They were against the way that automation was infringing on human dignity and work. And so consequently, we should maybe see in the Luddites an example for what it would mean for us to resist big tech today, because many of the problems that they were facing are eerily resonant from the automation of work, the effects that technology might have on creativity, and the way that technologies are contributing to intensified wealth gaps and inequalities throughout the world. And then on the right, I have the example of CCTV. I was in the State Watch archives in the Mayday rooms a few months ago with some wonderful collaborators, and I ended up kind of falling upon a file which was looking at British resistance to the rollout of CCTV cameras in the early 2000s. And I was really captivated by this file because this was a history of rejection and refusal that was very much linked to anti-policing movements in London that I just didn't know about at all. And so this is where I think that archival research is really, really crucial. So these are the ways that I see historical method, archival work being crucial to creating and constructing different histories of AI. But I also think that historical methods and analogies can be really useful, even when they go beyond AI, but rather I think that there's a real space for historical analogies with other technologies and scientific practices to be used to illuminate aspects about our current historical and political moment when it comes to AI development. And again, I think this is a really important riposte to this idea that AI is this radical break from the past. Of course, there are a wide plethora of analogies that are used for AI, some of which are more helpful, some of which I think are a little bit more harmful. So you might have seen the geopolitical race for AI be referred to as, say, the new space race, or, I think most insidiously of all, a new arms race. And these kinds of analogies and metaphors can be, I think quite harmful. They can escalate geopolitical competition. They can encourage people to leapfrog AI safety standards. And they can kind of more generally result in the erosion of movements towards regulation or rights protection under this kind of guise of sort of geopolitical urgency, saying, well, we have to win the race for these technologies, and that's more important than making sure they're safe or that they benefit everyone. But at the same time, we've seen some really interesting work that has tried to draw on previous histories of technological change to think about what lessons that could offer us for governing and regulating AI. So I think one of the most prominent comparisons we see is with nuclear governance. And so this is hotly contested whether or not nuclear offers us useful lessons for thinking about collaboration, disarmament, non-proliferation, and AI technologies. So what I would say to this is really that, I think the analogies we share about AI are always complex and multifaceted, and that their utility really depends on how we use them. So, for example, if we take the idea of nuclear as a comparison, on one hand, it's really helpful to think about a time when international cooperation was actually meaningfully generated in some ways to deal with a technology that was incredibly transformative. But there's ways in which this analogy is also very, very limited. So here's a couple. So the first is that treating nuclear and AI as analogies ignores the fact that AI and nuclear increasingly go hand in hand. That's both on the levels of threat in terms of the new kinds of hazards and risks posed by the integration of AI systems and nuclear weapons decision-making systems, but also in the implication of AI and nuclear power, because as companies now deal with the massive energy needs of these systems, they're increasingly turning to and buying nuclear power centers, which is something I think we should be thinking about and questioning. And I also think it's important that we think about where we tell these histories and analogies and stories from, because on one level, the story of nuclear governance is sometimes told as a success story as well. There was not, as of yet, nuclear annihilation, and this is a success for global governance. But in many parts of the world, this success was not felt. So in the Pacific, for example, which was subject to huge amounts of nuclear testing, this story of governance was, I think, in many ways just an abject failure, despite many, many requests to international law for protection. The Pacific still continues to grapple with the horrors of nuclear testing today. And so, I think what it means for something to be a success also has to be questioned geographically. And I think this particularly matters as well. And I think nuclear testing is also a helpful reminder here, which is, in my work, I think a lot about how maybe one of the more useful things to focus on is not necessarily the way that analogies can be used to tell and construct success stories, but more to think about what kinds of political conditions lead to the development of technologies that are really harmful, and how can we be attuned to when our world is heading in that direction or it's already there? So for me, I look a lot at, for example, how science and technology development has often been intimately entwined with colonialism, imperialism, and war. So rather than thinking about what technology is exactly like AI, I tend to ask, what conditions lead to new technologies being developed and tested with huge human and environmental costs? What political contexts are ripe for exploitation by tech companies and governments? And how can we move forward with meaningful governance and regulation without the motivating force of abject disaster? And so with that in mind, I want to actually close on a third reason or area where I see historical research and methods being really important. And I want to pose, which is a relatively new research question for me, which is, what is the interplay between archive ethics and AI ethics? Or how can historical methods, research, stories help us generate different and new approaches to AI ethics? And so I want to now close with a few examples of where history has been really influential in shaping our understanding of technologies and giving us different perspectives of them, and then also maybe thinking about different methods that could come out from this. So the first is, historical work around affect and emotion has been really influential in shaping our critiques of affect recognition technologies. So Saidiya Hartman, who also wrote Venus in Two Acts, I think one of the most beautiful essays on thinking through archives of disappearance and loss, has a very famous critique of the slipperiness of empathy in relation to power inequalities in her work Scenes of Subjection. And this work has been taken up very enthusiastically by critics of AI when it comes in particular to the use of empathy building exercises or technologies. So Cynthia Bennett and Danielle Rosner talk about this in relation to design processes that encourage designers to put themselves in the place of a disabled person. Lisa Nakamura uses this to critique what she calls virtuous virtual reality, or VR programs that are designed to try and make people feel empathy with an oppressed person. And they argue, based off Hartman, that this is replicating the same dynamics of powerlessness and erasure that they're trying to critique. The second is relating to AI, death bots, grief bots, and post-mortem avatars, or the project of reanimating the dead through AI. We have fantastic researchers at our center who are investigating this in detail. And this is a massive ethical problem, but I think it's also one where archival research has distinct contributions to make, because archival researchers have been thinking about this question of how do we ethically and sensitively engage with the data of those who have passed for centuries. This is a really central aspect of doing this kind of sensitive research. And so, I think this is a place where lessons can be meaningfully drawn. And then the third area I want to think about was new modes of relation, that there's something that is learned in the embodied process of doing archival research that can help us think differently about the way that we interact with machines. So I want to give two examples of this. And the first is relating to labor, or making visible the labor of sorting and categorizing data. Because one of the problems we see in the AI industry is that so much of the work that goes to power AI, so things like sorting and categorizing data sets, is often hidden labor. It's labor that's broken down to lots and lots of very poorly paid, distributed little component tasks that are then often outsourced to other countries, say in the global south, very poorly remunerated and often psychologically damaging work in the case of things like content moderation. But then AI operates under this guise that there is no labor involved. It seems almost magical in how it operates, and this is very dangerous. And this is also profoundly different to what it's like to do archival work. With archival work, you often see the archivists themselves, you interact with them, you see the many hands that have touched the document, you see the labels on the boxes, and you see the work of categorizing data in an incredibly embodied and material way. And I find that a really interesting riposte to this kind of hidden labor of technology. And then secondly, I think archival research offers us a different mode of relationship to data because of the way that archival research requires you to embrace the bizarre and the absurd. Doing archival research, I always tell my students, is not a simple or linear process. It is inherently messy and effective, and you're always being forced into encounters with documents and people with whom you did not seek those encounters. So if you're wondering why there's a photo of a sheepdog on this slide, it's because I went to the archives 2 weeks ago to try and do some research on fingerprinting, and instead the file that I was looking at was filled with stories about a sheepdog that had received a medal for valor for rescuing some pilots that had crashed in the UK. And if you're wondering why those files were there, I also don't know why they were there, but these are the kinds of unexpected encounters you always have. And sometimes these encounters are frustrating, but I wanted to flag this sort of openness to the bizarre, the unexpected, the absurd, because I think it's so different to the way we think about and treat data in AI. There's a huge emphasis on clean data, on controlled data, on removing absurdities and from the data set as errors. And I think archival research, with all of its messiness and its lateral thinking, pushes against that impulse and that drive to optimize and rationalize. And so I would like us to kind of continue and think about what does it mean for us to embrace this element of surprise in AI ethics. So thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing all of your questions.
Thank you very much, Eleanor and Kerry, for the fantastic talk. The insight into your work and your passion about AI ethics is truly inspiring. We will now take a 5-minute comfort break. Please keep your questions coming in the Q&A box and join us again in 5 minutes. That means 5 to 12, just before 12, for our live Q&A session with our speakers. Welcome back, everyone. We are now back from our 5-minute comfort break to start our live Q&A with our speakers. I can see already very interesting questions in the chat, and please feel free to continue posting your questions. But before I start reading the questions coming into the Q&A box, I will use my privilege of chairing this lecture today to ask a question myself. Thanks again, Kerry and Eleanor. You gave us a good insight on how feminism and anti-racist scholarship can fit into AI ethics with specific examples, toolkits, and work of others and your own work. I wonder if you could also talk a bit more generally about arts and humanities, and why do you think that methods and knowledge from the arts and humanities in particular matter in the field of AI?
Yeah, Eleanor, do you want to respond to that first?
Sorry, I didn't catch the last part. Can you just repeat that?
Oh, yes. I wonder if you could talk a bit more generally about arts and humanities, and why do you think that methods and knowledge from the arts and humanities in particular matter in the field of AI?
Absolutely. And this actually responds to one of the questions in the chat, which is, how did you both get into this work? And so the centre that we work for, which is called the Centre for the Future of Intelligence, is really concerned with how AI is narrativized in popular culture. Now, the idea of the AI narrative was something that seemed very obscure to me, but today we can see it everywhere. We know that when Elon Musk talks about AI, what he's doing is telling a story. And that story is one that attracts investment, a particular kind of politics. It's not just giving facts about how AI works. And as people that understand how stories are made and told, we are the best people to know what's going on. My PhD, very strangely, was in the history of science fiction written by women writers from 1666 to 2016, from various places across Europe. That's because I was funded by the European Union, that spoke to issues of race and gender. And what it was trying to show was what happens to the human when you push what it means to be human to its logical extreme in space, which is sort of what science fiction does. It troubles the boundaries of the human. What does that say about these internal categorizations that we've built for ourselves? So, you know, the human can really only be understood often within these categories of race and gender and class. And, you know, these are the kinds of systems that we've created for ourselves so that we can self-identify as human. Anyway, AI gets us thinking about what it means to be human, and there's some very toxic ways that happens. And I showed the images of the Vitruvian Man and Le Penseur. You know, these are the emblematic of humanity. These are the kind of archetypal humans. And when we read a lot of stories about what it really means to be human, to share the earth with people that we don't choose, to cohabit, to share ideas, to rebel, to live ethically with one another and the planet, we actually are experts in what it means to be human. And so when you have these big tech bros that say we can only fulfill our purpose as humans if we merge with technology, those are very dangerous stories, and they are a real misunderstanding of what it means to be who we are. So there's many ways that the humanities can intervene, and I hope that everyone with their expertise in storytelling and in humanity and, you know, humanistic reasoning can think critically about what they're being told and hold value in their expertise. Sorry about my emails. It's an absolute influx of stuff coming in this morning.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. Kerry, would you like to add anything?
No, I think that was great. And it's also where we have such a large number of really exciting questions in the chat. So I'm happy to,
Like lots of them,
Eleanor's answer.
Great, positive, enthusiastic feedback. You both talked about the invisible labor going into this kind of tools, but there is a question really in relation to that, that it reads, do you have any suggestions for how we can better make invisible labor of all kind, but especially the human effort that powers automatic processes more visible?
I can talk to this quickly, and then Eleanor, if you want to add on with the work you've been doing with the tool, because I think that's extremely relevant here as well. Yeah, no, I think this is a really important question, because I think it's one where specifically feminist work has a lot to offer, because I think the history of feminist activism around work has often been around the way that gendered and racialized labor has historically been undervalued and invisibilized. So everything from the wages for housework movement in the 1970s to the feminist data work we see today that is trying to map and show sort of who does the dirty work of data cleaning and annotation, I think says a lot about the ways we need to rethink how we value certain types of labor. So I think, in terms of like practical things that people have been doing, so art projects like things like Carolyn Cinders's feminist data set, I think have been like really applied ways that people have tried to map and approach and think about where labor is coming from and who does what. I've also seen feminist scholarship and practice that has been thinking through the lens of care. So saying like, whose job is it to care for and maintain systems? And so Anne Boyer, who's actually a poet, has a really beautiful piece from a few years ago where she talks about going through the medical clinic, and then she looks at the way that women's work, or she's particularly talking about female nurses, is really central to kind of taking her messy, unruly, fleshly body and turning it into data that her then male doctor would look at. So she talks about the medical clinic being a place where the labor of care meets the labor of data. And so, and she was also kind of comparing that to, say, the women who were largely responsible in that clinic for data entry. And so I think these kinds of projects, some more experimental and artistic, maybe kind of some more meditative and philosophical, are really important for just showing that these technologies are not immaterial, but they're deeply vested in material work.
Thank you so much, Kerry. Eleanor?
I think that's perfect. There's lots of questions I want to make sure we get through some.
So I'll read there are a couple of them that they are focusing on the critical perspectives of on AI and the implications as well of bringing AI tools into the archival work. So I will read one of them now. So it was particularly heartening to hear about ways in which archival research can inform critical perspectives on AI. Do you have any thoughts on how these critical approaches can in turn inform our practice as archivists, archive workers?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to cede here to people who are much more expert than I am in the ethics of archival work. But yeah, I actually came into this research because I did my PhD in women's hunger strikes. And so I was doing a lot of archival research in the National Archives and in the Women's Library at LSE around women's often self-narratives of their hunger strikes and kind of prison torture. And these were incredibly emotionally challenging, kind of often extremely violent narratives. And so I was trying to think about what does it mean to engage with these materials through an ethic of care. And I think this is, another kind of area of feminist and anti-racist research. And I know there's also a lot of scholars here thinking about what it means to engage ethically and with care when it comes to colonial archives, which are often themselves kind of sites of extraordinary kind of narrative, photographic, immaterial violence. And so I guess one way that I like to think about this is through the lens of critical scholars who are trying to read both with and against the grain of the archive. So saying like, what spaces are there for kind of, pushing back against like the limitations of the archives and its portrayal, while also kind of not indulging in like unhealthy flights of fantasy when it comes to like reconstructing the lives of people whose lives are often confined to the archives only in these moments of kind of death or disappearance and despair. But yeah, I mean, that is just a very long way of saying like, I think just these questions of sort of what does restoration mean when dealing with archives of kind of violence and disappearance, as you know, is really, really complicated. And I would definitely gesture towards the, much more informed and fantastic work of kind of feminist, decolonial, anti-colonial scholars who are engaging so ethically and so thoughtfully and generously, I think, with those questions.
Thank you so much.
And I would just add to that to bridge the previous question on the invisibilization of labor, and this question on the archives, that I realized I was sitting next to these kind of hilarious little sort of dolls that I created during my PhD, and they were of invisible science fiction writers that wrote under male pen names, and I mean they're pretty silly, but when I was doing this archival work trying to find science fiction writers from 1666 to the present, a lot of them, because they'd written under either their partner's name or they created fake names, it was very difficult actually to find them. So there's this really has kind of this work is supposed to transform who we think of as the science fiction writer, and equally science fiction has such a central part in innovation. With Elon Musk's favorite books are all things that he rereads those, he invests in technologies that resemble the technologies in those books. Asimov's Foundation trilogy is widely cited by technologists and venture capitalists as their primary source of enthusiasm, passion, ideation about what AI should look like in the future. And so these stories are so important, and the idea that science fiction is a male domain, that's a story in itself, because it's totally untrue. I also would say that unions, tech unions have played a major part in telling the public what kinds of invisibilized labor there are and how it can be improved, and creating solidarity between them and other invisibilized labor in parts of the world where they can't so easily raise their voices. So I take a lot of inspiration, I think, has been taken from the solidarity movements in Latin America, the Veronica Gago and the Feminist International movements, that have been really amazing at raising their cry for more attention to be paid to underpaid work of women, but also matricide and violence against women. So I think we can take a look at other movements that aren't necessarily related to AI when we think about how we can make different issues more visible.
Thank you so much, both. Still coming, the questions, they're all very, very interesting. I will read now one of the questions in relation to environmental impact of the use of AI. So this attendee write to us, I wanted to ask how the environmental impact aspect and environmental justice plays a part in your thinking about AI, and when and the attendee adds how this can often get lost when AI tools are used in the workforces.
Yeah, do you want to speak to that first, Eleanor, or I can speak to it otherwise?
Yeah, we both can. I think that there's now more awareness around the environmental impact of AI, and what we've tried to do with this tool is to future-proof it slightly, so that we are thinking about the environment as a stakeholder. This is something that I have learned from my colleague Tomasz Holonek. It's quite a radical idea that the environment is a stakeholder, as a user would be, or a procurer, when you create in different AI tools. And when Kerry speaks, I can find the slide that explores that. But this is why on our podcast we interview a lot of people like Anne Pasek, these really interesting radical thinkers that say, well, hang on, what if we used different parts of the internet in keeping with the movements of the sun, so that if we're using solar panel technology that only allows us access to particular sites like Instagram, for example, during daylight hours, so that would prevent doom scrolling in the evening. That would solve quite a lot of issues in itself. But there are some really interesting and she's also, more importantly, getting people to be aware of where their local data centers are, and to protest against the construction of additional data centers. I mean, most of us have no idea where the movement of data flows when we go onto YouTube or whatever. And I think it's really important that we gain part of AI literacy is becoming aware of the movement, of just how opening a website and accessing it day or night, how that actually functions. But yeah, maybe Kerry can say a bit more about that.
Yeah, and I think, I think it's really important to kind of raise awareness around both kind of the individualized environmental costs of using these technologies. Like, I think there's been a lot more awareness of the way that, for example, large language models are powered by data centers that need huge amounts of water and electricity to function. So you start to see statistics being thrown around, like, say, like, a 20-minute conversation with ChatGPT is the same as using, like a 500 milliliter bottle of water. I'm not sure if that's the exact statistics, so don't quote me. And I think these kinds of like individualized ways of thinking about AI and environmental destruction are really, really important. At the same time, I think maybe for workers as well, another way of framing it can also be to kind of zoom out and look at the broader social and political costs of the environmental drain caused by these technologies. So, for example, I believe it was last year that in Taiwan suffered a huge drought. Taiwan is one of the kind of foremost producers of high-powered chips, which are central for creating these AI systems. And so I believe a lot of water was rerouted from agricultural production into chip production that year. And so this has kind of huge costs for a lot of people. And I think that these kind of wide-scale environmental disasters, which I think are only going to keep coming because we're in this sort of escalating moment of climate crisis, should really cause us to take pause and to ask, as Eleanor was saying, is this even the right option at all? Like, can this really be worth the kinds of environmental costs that these tools might be generating?
Yeah, great. And I've just popped in the chat, in the webinar chat, a screenshot of part of the environmental section of the toolkit that we've been creating that asks people developing AI tools to consider these different aspects, the type of training, estimated carbon footprint. But again, there's lots of issues and related into that. But we're using the Hugging Face tool. It's really great. It's a very cool, very ethical company based in France. And just to get people thinking about it. And it's a real shame that it's not part of the EU AI Act as of yet, but going forwards, I'm hoping that it will be.
Thank you very much, both. I will read a final question, a last question, and then we can wrap up today's lecture. This is about unexpected archive finds, and I think Kerry mentioned that towards the end of her part of her presentation. So this attendee wonders about the concerns that you may have from the ethics side of research avenues and archive data collecting, about the loss that we experience when we use AI analysis on archival sources.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that first, and then maybe Eleanor can jump in kind of from her experience doing archival research on science fiction authors, because I think that's very, very relevant here as well. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I know there's a lot of questions to chat more broadly when it comes to like what are the ethical perils when it comes to digitalization and AI. And I do also, again, want to cede expertise to archivists and also people in the digital humanities who've been thinking about these questions in a lot more depth and knowledge than I have. But I do think this kind of question of what does it mean to kind of bring the archives online and to start using AI tools in these spaces is really indicative of like wider tensions we see across the spectrum of AI application. Because like, on the one hand, like I completely agree that, I think that digitalizing archives is really, really crucial for access. I myself have often relied on digital archives, and it can be really, really challenging when materials aren't available online. I personally struggle with reading handwriting a lot, and so having kind of online transcriptions of different documents has been incredibly valuable. But at the same time, I also think that this has to be kind of balanced with the fact that we still continue to see the material engagement with an archival document as itself a really valuable experience, in part because of this importance of surprise and disruption, something that I think AI is just like unable to provide us with. It's inherently a homogenizing tool. But also in part because I think that there are different kinds of engagement we get from being with the physical text. And so sometimes these can be unexpected and unfortunate engagements. I remember a friend of mine went to the US to look for an archival document on a railroad, and she got there and she opened it, and it turned out to just be an actual physical piece of the railroad, which wasn't very helpful for her research, but was quite funny. But also I remember another scholar talking about how she was reading these letters that a woman was writing as she was giving birth, and you could see in how she was writing the labor contractions. You could see the text actually shifting and changing as she was going through that physical process. I think most of us have kind of had these moments where actually just like a digitized text version of that document wouldn't have conveyed nearly so much as what the document itself conveys. And so, yeah, I think this balance between accessibility, between ease and access, and the fact that that is a crucially important social justice project in and of itself, with the fact that we still see something really valuable in this kind of human embodied engagement, is something that I'm always thinking about when it comes to digitalization. I don't think I have time to talk to. There's also a lot of like really interesting questions when it comes to digitalization and ownership. So someone's put a really interesting question about the cloud and document storage.
Yeah.
These like documents then get held and what it means, how can they then be exploited? But yeah, I think that's also a really important question, maybe one we don't have time to kind of delve into in full.
Well, maybe it's the second half of that. I can say that I mean, if you look at the news now about, a month ago, there was always all the stuff about Microsoft and Google in a war over the cloud, because Microsoft just created a new lobbying front called the Open Cloud Coalition. So archives brought to you by Microsoft TM. I mean, are you prepared to have your archives owned? Because the cloud is not this ephemeral thing. The cloud is data centers. It is massively energy consumptive. It is owned by these monopolies. And this is what we have to really think carefully about when we're storing things. I mean, I know now there was, I'm paying absolute fortune every month. And I think I will hopefully be one of the people that gets money back, because there has been lots of, because of these antitrust suits, which I'm very pleased about. I've been trying to respond to some of the other questions in the chat as we go now.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. We have to wrap up now, I'm afraid, but thank you to all the attendees who engaged with us, with the speakers. All the questions, they are really fascinating. Some of them we couldn't pick up during this live Q&A, but we will share the links to all the different avenues you can get in touch with our speakers, and you can engage with them offline if you wish to. And thank you, Eleanor and Kerry, for taking the time to talk to us today, for providing insight into your own digital research, and for joining us to discuss important issues regarding AI regulation and governance, ethics, and how all of this intersects with and impact archives and archival research. If you're interested in exploring this topic further, and hearing more about Kerry's and Eleanor's work, you can tune into their podcast, The Good Robot, and sign up to their newsletter via the Good Robot website. I believe we will share all these links with you in the chat. And as I mentioned earlier, digital research is a hugely important part of our archival work here at the National Archives. As part of this year's lecture, and to showcase some of our existing digital research that is happening across the organization, we currently have a collection of research posters on display on site at Kew. If you are coming to the National Archives, please do have a look. We do have one more research event in our program for 2024, the online symposium titled HIV and AIDS Archives, Collections, Research and Responses, on Tuesday, the 3rd of December. The link again will be shared into the chat, so do have a look if you are interested. And finally, we will be sending out an online feedback survey via Eventbrite later today. Your feedback is really invaluable to us when we are planning events like this, so please do fill that in if you have 5 or 10 minutes to spare. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. We hope that you have enjoyed this year's annual digital lecture and perhaps even been inspired to explore further some of the topics we have discussed today with Kerry and Eleanor. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much for your questions. reach out. Bye.